How does the cell membrane structure relate to the jobs of the cell membrane? Sometimes it's called the plasma membrane, and it has a lot of different organic molecules that make up that cell membrane. But the plasma membrane, or sometimes called the cell membrane, that's the organelle that surrounds the cell. Its primary job is going to be allowing things to come into the cell, but not just anything. It also has some other minor jobs that have a lot to do with cell structure and even cells joining together with other cells to form tissues. The cell membrane or plasma membrane is made up of a lipid bilayer. What that means is that we have phospholipids. So the phospholipids consist of a phosphate head with lipid tails. The lipid tails face each other. The phosphates are on the outside. And this is because oil and water don't mix. The lipids are hydrophobic, so they orient away from water. The phosphates are hydrophilic, water-loving, and they orient toward water. So it creates this barrier that separates the inside of the cell from the outside of the cell. But it's called a bilayer because there's two layers of lipids along that inside part of the membrane. There are all kinds of things in that cell membrane: carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and that's why it's called a fluid mosaic. A mosaic because it's made of all kinds of organic molecules, but fluid because those organic molecules don't always stay in the same location. In other words, the proteins that might act as gates or channels to allow things in the cell, they move around that membrane, so they're not always in one fixed location. Here's an example of some of the things that you might find in a cell membrane. Notice that there are all kinds of different proteins, peripheral proteins, integral proteins, that allow things to enter and leave. It's these kind of proteins that are going to be enzymes that function in photosynthesis. You can see that there's cholesterol in the cell membrane embedded in it that gives the cell membrane some structure and support. So not all cholesterol is bad. Other things like the glycoproteins are carbohydrate protein complexes that allow cells to recognize and identify each other. Finally, cells membranes are semi-permeable. That means some things can enter, but not everything. Large macromolecules can't just waltz into the cell through the membrane. They have to go through a carrier protein. Same with water, because oil and water don't mix. Certain proteins allow water to enter or leave the cell. But some things that are small molecules, they are not charged molecules, they can slip through the membrane, like oxygen, for example, could get right into the cell membrane because it's small. So the cell membrane allows things to enter and leave the cell, but not everything can enter or leave the cell. So if you think about those three characteristics of a cell membrane, which one reminds you most of an Oreo cookie? Which one reminds you of a tea bag? And which one reminds you of the duck pond game at a carnival? Well, the lipid bilayer reminds me of an Oreo cookie. The cookie part are the phosphates, and the double stuffing of a double stuffed Oreo cookie reminds me of the lipid part. A tea bag reminds me of the semi-permeability. The water can go in and out of a tea bag, but not the leaves. And the duck pond game reminds me of a fluid mosaic because those ducks float on the water, they're not stationary. And in the same way, those parts of that cell membrane can move around within that plasma membrane. Hopefully this has been helpful in just getting an idea of what does the plasma membrane look like and what does it do.